if everybody can find a seat. We do have some water back here and snacks. If David hasn't eaten them all by now.
Or Chris.
Just a heads up, we're going to be filming this tonight and put it on our website via a YouTube link. So some people that are a lot techier than I am, like Chris Johnson, who is he's in charge of communication and technology. So I thank him very much.
High school AV monitor.
Also, Steve Hansen is here, who is our chair for North Hills Community Association. And also Dave McGinnis is there, our treasurer.
Snack eater, the treasurer.
Treasurer.
So we're 13 by 8. Yeah.
And also, the work that we do, we're all volunteers. And so we hope that you will visit Dave or wave at Dave, because he has donation envelopes that will go a long way to helping us have more meetings like this with your interest in mind, your welfare in mind, and also for all the printing and
Room rentals.
room rentals when we have to do it. We thank the Montclair Presbyterian Church very much for donating this room tonight, which is great. I want to recognize Dan Kelb, our District 1 council member, who has joined us today. And thank you for joining us, Dan. And also Mina Sandu, who is in his office now, one of his staff assistants here. And also, let me see, Randy Stukes, who is with Brenda Roberts' office. She is the city auditor, and he has been kind enough, she'll be here in a little while, but he has brought some of the audits that have been done by Brenda, which causes the city to want to change in positive ways. And so we thank Randy for being here now, and Brenda will be here in a while. So we have our panel up here, which Vince Cudelli, sitting all by himself, is our fearless supervisor of vegetation management for Oakland. And also we have Brian Biancardi, who is with PG&E. He's the vegetation management supervisor. Vitali Turian, who is the PG&E Senior Manager for the East Bay Division of Leadership, and it's kind of the
I'll just say local customer experience.
Local customer experience, okay. And then Matt Hender, who is a PG&E Director of Enhanced Vegetation Management. So he gets more involved with what PG&E is doing now, trying to abate any of the wildfires, heaven forbid, that might happen. As you know, in Clayton, we have a fire going on right now, and there's one, I think, in the South Bay.
Yeah.
Gilroy.
In Gilroy. So we no longer have a fire season. It is year-round. So we must not only take care of ourselves, but encourage the city to take care of their properties. And we want to learn tonight. This is basically going to be an informational meeting. You know, we have sent all the questions that you sent to me via Open Forum or Nextdoor. I have copied and pasted to PG&E. And so they should be covering all of those questions. If they don't, then we will have, after we get done here, then we will be taking some questions from you that are present. I also want to let you know that we have representatives from East Bay Mud. They are not up here at the front, so they are learning as we are as we go, and we hope that we can all be working together in a positive way. So I thank you very much, and now whoever is going to start the presentation for PG&E. Okay? Okay. Thanks, Matt.
You want to talk about that before I switch to that?
Well, what we have up here in front of us is the wildland.
Carolyn?
Oh, yes. Oh. Vince is the foremost expert. It's your map.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Vince Cornelli with the Oakland Fire Department. This is our state-designated very high fire severity zone. So that red line is basically the Oakland Hills. It goes a little bit below Highway 13 and Highway 580, all the way up to the Contra Costa County line. That area is 10,590 acres. It's 16.5 square miles. You have currently 18,889 single-family residents, 2,563 vacant lots. And I gotta do my math here for the balance, but about 2,400 duplex or triplex houses included in that. You got approximately 307 miles of roadway, and we have it split in Oakland into 5 fire inspection districts that are handled by my unit. So that's our high fire severity zone. Yes, ma'am.
How do we get to be a very high fire severity?
Population density, topography, vegetation density, aspect to sun and wind, and roadway complexity. And that's done by the State Fire Marshal's Office. CAL FIRE, the state fire agency, goes throughout areas of California looking at communities and designates which areas could be moderate fire severity zone, high fire severity zone, or very high fire severity zone. We fall into the last and most extreme, which is the very high fire severity zone.
Thank you.
Okay.
One more thing. This map is in the city's new draft vegetation management plan, and that's available online on the city's website. You can get it, you can read it. It's draft right now. I know our organization, Marseilles Community Association, and other people have some real concerns about about what it's recommending, and we don't think, so we've been voicing our concerns about it. But that's where that document is, if you want to see it.
Okay.
I also want to start out by saying that I think it's important to treat everybody well here. Everybody is trying their best, and this is all new. I mean, even though fires have been going on, whether it be in Australia or in the United States or even in Greece now, we're all learning as we go along. So we want to be kind to people, and we want to be able to listen. So, oh, there he is. Okay, onward.
Thank you very much. So as she introduced, I'm Matt Pender. I'm PG&E's Director of Enhanced Vegetation Management. As we'll get to in our slide deck here, Enhanced Vegetation Management is one part of PG&E's comprehensive community wildfire safety program. And we're going to talk about all the parts of that program tonight, a number of which have different impacts to our communities and our customers. And as the chief mentioned, there are large areas of the hills here that qualify as Tier 3, which is our lexicon, the CPUC's lexicon for the highest fire threat areas. We'll get into that. This deck was prepared with the questions that you sent us in mind. So most of those, well, all of those questions are answered in this deck. There may be follow-up questions or things like that, and we're happy to do that. What I'd ask is that we reserve the questions till the end, because I think a lot of them will get asked as we go through the deck. The deck starts at a summary level and then moves into more detail. So let's go with that approach. So we'll move through the deck, and we'll leave plenty of time for Q&A at the end. And we'll try to make sure we get done by 9 o'clock to respect everyone's time, and also then we can have one-on-one conversations if people still have questions or anything like that. She introduced the PG&E team. There's one more member over here. Les Putnam is our senior public safety specialist. He is sort of our liaison, works with a lot of fire departments. He himself comes from a firefighting background, and he'll add some commentary at the end a little bit for us. So with that, let me go ahead and get into it. So everybody has observed what's going on in California with the new normal in terms of additional wildfire threats, the never-ending fire season, as some people are calling it, with wildfire risk not diminishing during the parts of the year that we might expect it to. So we are working, PG&E is responding to that unprecedented and unexpected level of wildfire risk, and the Community Wildfire Safety Program is our sort of packaged program to respond to that. So What are we doing? We're bolstering our wildfire prevention and emergency response programs. We're putting in place mitigations to reduce wildfire risk. And then we've got long-term plans to change our electric system, to harden the system, to make it more resilient throughout our service territory, as well as in your community here. Why is it happening? We've talked about some of the reasons. The U.S. Forest Service estimates California has 129 million dead or dying trees. A lot of that's in the Sierras with the bark beetle, the effects of the drought, that kind of thing. So the whole state is experiencing new conditions that we haven't seen before. And then we know that this impacts our communities, and so we are working very closely with customers individually, as well as with community leaders, first responder groups like fire departments, to make sure that everyone understands what we're looking to do here, that we're coordinated with what they're doing, and that we're all making plans for how to respond to the risks that are presented to us now that hadn't been there before. So, some details on what we're doing, and as I mentioned, we'll get into more details on each of these topics, but this is sort of the summary of the package of what PG&E is doing as part of our Community Wildfire Safety Program. So, we have a new Wildfire Safety Operations Center. We're expanding our network of PG&E weather stations. We have already completed the addition of 50 new weather stations throughout the system. 8 of those are in the Berkeley, Oakland Hills area. And that helps us pinpoint our weather forecasting and our wildfire risk information better than we would have before, and continue as we add more stations to continue to refine that. And then we're working on adding wildfire and infrastructure protection teams. This is something we're working closely with CAL FIRE on in terms of how do we integrate those resources into protecting PG&E assets, into supporting our communities, into aligning with what CAL FIRE needs to do when wildfire season is here. So that's something we're still working on with them. In the middle column, we have the things that we're working on right now to enhance wildfire safety for this wildfire season. The first is enhanced vegetation management. That's actually the program that I operate, and we'll get into more details on what that means. Second is about disabling the automatic reclosing of reclosers. So people who are familiar with the electric distribution system may understand what that means. Other people are shaking their heads, that's fine. There's a slide later that explains that in a little more detail. But basically that's about reducing the risk of a wildfire, and it has the potential to mean that reliability, we may have a few more outages than we would have if we didn't take this step, but we're taking this step to make sure that we mitigate the wildfire risk. And then lastly, on this middle section is refining and executing our protocols to proactively turn off power if the extreme wildfire risk exists. So again, there's more detail on this later, and that's the program we know has the most impact to our customers. So we really want people to understand that and to think about what it means for them and how they would plan for and respond to an incident like that if that were to occur. On the far right, we are also looking at the long term. How do we need to change our system over the long run to make sure that it's as wildfire resilient as possible? So we're looking at coated power lines in some places that may be stronger, replacing wood poles with non-wood poles that have more resiliency against fire, and things like that. And then working with communities to develop microgrids. So at this point, we're already executing pilots on those kind of things. We're already changing our design standards about how we're going to update our assets going forward, but that's not a short-term, gonna fix all the risk for this year kind of thing. That's a long-term strategy for PG&E. So, how do we decide where we're gonna? All right. How do we decide where we're gonna do this work and where we're gonna prioritize? The CPUC has provided us guidance in the form of this map. This map was developed by the CPUC with CAL FIRE, utility companies, other experts, to determine the highest risk areas for wildfire in the state of California. The goldish yellow is tier 2, which means an elevated risk of wildfire. The brown areas are tier 3, extreme wildfire risk area. The CPUC adopted this map officially in January of this year, and so that's what we've been responding to and how we've been reacting, and we'll zoom in on this in a second. For folks who are interested in this map, as he mentioned, the Oakland map can be found on their website. This map can be found on the CPUC website. There's a couple PDFs you can zoom into. If you're GIS savvy, there's actually the GIS shape files that you can download and do things with to assess what this might mean for your community. There's also, I'll get to it a little bit later in more detail, there's a spot on PG&E's website at the pgne.com/wildfire safety website where you can enter your address and it'll give you some information about if you're impacted by these high fire threat zones. So as we zoom into that map for Contra Costa and Alameda County, you can see that pretty much the entire hill sort of ridge zone is mostly tier 3 with tier 2 sort of on the skirts, and then also as you get deeper into Contra Costa County. So it doesn't impact everyone in these two counties, but it does impact a considerable number of people, including, I believe, the building we're standing in today. Zooming in a little bit further, Berkeley and Oakland, you can see the details there again along the hillside. And down here in the corner, it points out the number of PG&E customers, that is sort of PG&E meters, that were impacted by the Tier 3 zone. So, as I mentioned earlier, PG&E is setting up our protocols for disabling electric power in extreme circumstances to protect, to mitigate wildfire risk in the Tier 3 areas. If we had to do that, this is the total number of customers, households, that would hypothetically be impacted. So a little over 5,000 in Berkeley and a little over 13,000 in Oakland are served by a circuit that runs through the Tier 3 dark brown area.
And you'd kill the whole circuit at one time?
For the most part. I can cover a little bit of that detail, but.
That's why they're going to microgrids.
Hey, if we can just hold the questions until we get through though.
I think that would be better because there's more detail on each of these things as we go to the next couple slides. So I mentioned at the beginning the Wildfire Safety Operations Center. It's in San Francisco. It looks like that. It's a 24/7 operations center. It's our nerve center for wildfire risk management. So that's where our meteorology department is looking at the feeds from all of those weather stations. We're also looking at video feeds from smoke detecting cameras throughout the state. We're in contact with and importing data feeds from CAL FIRE, from the National Weather Service, and others. So it's our nerve center pulling together all of that information. When we start to see information in that Wildfire Safety Operations Center that is concerning to us, extreme wildfire forecasts, for example, that's where we start to coordinate with public safety authorities, again, CAL FIRE, Cal OES, local authorities, etc., to make sure, to check, are they seeing what we're seeing, to begin to make plans about how we're going to respond to those risks. So, in an extreme circumstance, if what we see in the Wildfire Operations Center tells us that that extreme conditions may be descending upon an area, we would start to consider a public safety power shutoff. So we're reaching out to folks. We've been doing this pretty much a similar presentation to this to a number of communities who may be impacted to make sure that they can start to understand and think through what this would mean for them. So every single day we update our 7-day forecast for wildfire risk throughout the state of California, well, throughout our service territory, not the whole state, but PG&E service territory. And based on that forecast, we're taking into account the weather itself, fuel conditions on the ground. Is there dry vegetation that could be a really dangerous fuel mixture? We are sending out observers to validate on the ground that what we are thinking is out there is what's really out there, both in terms of weather, vegetation, structures, things of that nature. And then we begin reaching out to our public safety partners and agencies. If the forecast is as bad as we have begun to think, if it's an extreme condition, we begin to inform our customers and our community partners, that we may have to take the step of turning off power. So our goal is that if the conditions are stable and we can forecast 48 hours in advance, we begin to have the conversation with folks about, hey, this might happen in your community, the forecast is headed in that direction. We would be contacting our customers through all of the potential angles. We'd be text message, emails, outbound phone calls. We have partnered with some communities where they have sort of Nixle or other outbound communication methods to partner with them. So the important part of this is that we need everyone's accurate contact information. We have, in most cases, some contact information for folks. Sometimes it's an old phone number you don't use anymore, that kind of stuff. So we really encourage everyone to go to pgne.com/wildfire safety. There's a link on there to check my alert preferences. And you can go in there and update your phone number and tell us, do you want to be informed by text message, email, stuff like that. Tens of thousands of PG&E customers have already done that, and that's fantastic. But we don't want to miss anyone. So if you haven't done that, if your friends or neighbors haven't done that, please make sure you go there and update your information such that if this does apply to you, we can get a hold of you and start to let you know about that information. So we'd be beginning approximately 48 hours in advance to communicate to customers, contact their local officials, begin to coordinate on plans, and that kind of stuff. And then stage 3, if the conditions continue to warrant, if the weather forecast hasn't changed, then it would come to the point where we have to deactivate. And again, there'd be a number of communication steps between first notice and when we actually have to turn the power off. So we would shut off the power, we would wait for the extreme conditions to pass. As we know with the weather, that can be uncertain, so sometimes it can be relatively short, sometimes multiple days of high winds and the other risk factors we're considering. Once we have shut off the power, we would again notify everyone that that's happened. Once the conditions have passed, we need to inspect all of the lines that were impacted to make sure that no trees have fallen on lines, things of that nature. And so even once the weather has passed, we need to be ready for a 24-hour restoration period while our crews go out and patrol every line, make sure everything is safe. We don't want to turn the power back on if there's a hazard back out there. So what does this mean for a customer who lives in Tier 3 or is otherwise impacted by a Tier 3 circuit? You should expect, or you should be planning for this to occur 1 to 2 times per the peak of wildfire season. And I know we talk about wildfire season isn't a single season anymore. That's absolutely true. The peak of wildfire season is nonetheless sort of August to November or so, depending on when the first rains come and things of that nature. So during that window is when people need to be prepared for 1 to 2 of these public safety power shutoffs to occur. This is our last resort. This is our last line of defense. It's not something we want to do. We take it extremely seriously, but we want people to be aware and be thinking and planning for it. If it does happen, again, once the weather passes, we need to plan for 24 hours for PG&E to restore power. So in total, you should assume that these events, if they occur, will last 2 to 5 days. That's a really long time for some people, to not have power, and it's a really long time in particular for some of our more sensitive customers. So we will be making sure that we have made positive contact with folks who are on medical baseline or similar rate plans with PG&E, people who have let us know that they have a sensitivity in that way. We will even be going as far as sending out a person to drive to that house, knock on the door, and make sure the person is aware of what's happening and that they have a plan to respond to it. And again, we'll be trying to give people 1 to 48 hours notice. So things to keep in mind: when the power's out, your garage door doesn't work, right? When your power is out, your communications may or may not be impacted, right? So many landlines will still work. Most cell towers have a battery reserve for a period of time, but those are all the things that families need to be planning for if one of these were to occur, okay? What are my communication channels? Where do I want to stay in my home, or do I want to find a relative or friend to stay with during this period of time, etc. Medication can be a big issue. If you have medication that needs to be kept cold, what's your plan for that during this time? So part of our outreach here is that PG&E is making our plans, and we want to make sure you guys have a plan. Every customer who might be impacted is thinking about their plan, beginning to make a plan, and thinking through, what would I do first, what would I do second, how would I respond, where would I go from there? This mentions a lot of those details. We've begun sending postcards like that one in the middle and letters like the one behind it to customers who are impacted. Has anyone received a postcard like that? Okay, great. So that means that you're served by a circuit that runs through Tier 3, and you may be subject to this public safety power shutoff. I'm going to save it.
The odd thing is I went to the website after getting the postcard, entered my address, and it said, "Good news, you're not impacted."
We can look into that. We're casting a wide net to make sure that people are informed, even if it's maybe a little extra, right? But we'd rather err on the side of informing people. But yes, so that postcard had the information about update your contact information, etc. The point is update your contact information, prepare and practice your plan. What are you going to do if this impacts your community? Evaluate your home. if the power goes out and your garage door is closed, do you know how to manually open it, or would you need to open it before the power goes out? Are you ready with smoke alarms and fire extinguishers, that kind of stuff? And then your emergency supply kit. And again, this is related to your plan. So if your plan is, I'm gonna get out of town and stay with a relative, then your emergency supply kit should be in your car. If your plan is that you're gonna hunker down and be ready to go, then your plan, then your emergency kit can be in your home. But we just really want people to think through that, and so we're trying to reach out through various medium to get that message out to everyone.
Excuse me? Are you, I just want to ask, any mitigation for underground wires?
Oh, so circuits that run through tier 3 will have to be deactivated or if these conditions occur, right? Again, last line of defense, it's not our desire. Even if a part of that circuit goes underground, we can't isolate just that part and leave it energized. So yes, if it's on a tier 3 circuit, even if it goes underground, it would have to be de-energized for this condition. Okay, so that was the public safety power shutoff part of our program. Now I'm going to be talking about vegetation management, and to level set everyone on that, I want to give a little overview of what you see outside. And if you look right across the street, you got a perfect example of what's on the slide here.
And let me reiterate, we're not gonna take questions till after.
But that was the end of the blackout part. Now you're going into vegetation. If I have questions about the electricity, I can't ask them now.
We can come back to it at the end.
No. Do you want to take notes as you go, Leslie?
I'll be fine.
Okay.
You can take the notes.
So at the top of the poles, those are the distribution lines, the high voltage electric lines. There is almost always a yellow and black sticker at the top of the poles that says high voltage. Those are the lines that need clearance from vegetation. Okay, so those are the ones that we trim back from and make sure that the trees, vegetation don't get near, certainly don't contact. Below that, really everything below that on the line, on the pole, is not subject to vegetation management in the same way. Everything below that is at a lower voltage, or in the case of the communication wires, sometimes no voltage, and is therefore not a risk from that perspective. So at the top of the pole, you have the distribution lines, electric distribution, which is at a relatively high voltage, 12,000 volts, 21,000 volts, something like that. If there's a transformer, even if there's not a transformer, the section below that, the cross arm below that, has what's called secondary wires. Those are just at 240 volts, the same voltage that runs into your house. That's a low enough voltage that it isn't really impacted by being contacted by trees. The electricity doesndo choose to travel through a tree when it's only at 240 volts. And then the service wires, often spiral wires coming down from the pole, is just called a service wire. That's also at just 240 volts. So the point of this is we get a lot of calls from folks who say, oh, the trees are in the wires, you need to come work on this, come take a look at it. And some of those are a number of those are really helpful, right? A number of those maybe catch things that have changed since we were last out there. But if it's related to anything below the top of the pole, if it's related to the secondary wires or the communication lines are generally fatter, they're black, they're often wrapped in rubber or some kind of material. Number one, those aren't PG&E assets. Those are operated by Comcast or AT&T or someone like that. And number two, they don't really carry electricity. They may carry a small signal, but they're not subject to vegetation management. They're not a risk for trees to get into them and touch and conduct electricity. So if you see trees in your neighborhood and you're worried about their location, proximity to the wires, make sure you're looking at the top wires, the ones that have high voltage on the cross arm. Those are the ones that we need to be concerned about. Everything below that is really not of a concern, and we will monitor them, and if the tree and the wire are sort of stressing each other, we'll take action, but it's not something that needs to be resolved just because they're starting to get close to each other. Okay? So, what do we do about vegetation management? We are enhancing our vegetation management on two fronts in response to the new wildfire threat map and just the wildfire risk in general. So first, the 14th bullet here, the CPUC has established a requirement for in tier 2 or tier 3, really any of the wildfire zones, that we maintain 4-foot clearance, a 4-foot radius around each of our lines year-round all the time. And we inspect every line at least once per year, often more, but at least once per year. And we've been guided by the CPUC that when we're out there and we inspect and we decide to trim a tree, we should trim it back around 12 feet, sometimes more, to make sure that it has room to grow without encroaching on that 4-foot radius. Okay? So the required routine veg management, which is what Brian and his team take care of for your area, is to make sure we have 4-foot clearance. In the flatlands where it's not a high fire threat area, it's 18 inches of clearance, but everything in the hills here is tier 2 or tier 3, which would be 4 feet. Which means trimming back to 12 feet. So some people say, wow, you really trimmed that tree back, you don't need to be that far away. Well, we need to make sure there's enough room for it to grow and not encroach on the line before the next time we're out there, which is, let's assume, once per year. Often it's more. To go further and to add an extra line of defense, PG&E is pursuing fire defense zones in all of the tier 3 areas to create a buffer around the overhead distribution line. So we're looking at 15 feet on either side of our pole line at the vegetation around it and identifying vegetation that could be problematic, that could act as a fuel if a wildfire were to occur or a spark were to be found in that zone. So we're trying to create fire defense zones, which would be, again, 15 feet on either side of the line, approximately, that can create a safe space between our assets and the vegetation. It can provide an access point for first responders and PG&E crews. If an emergency were to occur, we can easily get in there, access our stuff, do what needs to be done. And it can help create defensible space around your home, your property, if you have other structures, that kind of thing. So this is an additional program that PG&E is undertaking, working with our customers to help them understand what we're doing, why we're doing it, how it will impact their property, but to add a layer of defense, to add a layer of insulation around our electric lines and their property. So that's our enhanced vegetation management, and that's the program that I actually lead for PG&E. Reclosers, we talked about this earlier. So what a recloser is a device that retests the line. After a brief outage occurs, it will send a signal back through the line to see if it can repower the circuit. So if you've ever experienced the lights going out for 10 seconds or 30 seconds and then blinking back on, that was a recloser operating. There was a brief fault on the system, the recloser stopped the flow of electricity and then sent it back through again. That is a useful device for improving reliability and creating a situation where your lights blink for 10 seconds instead of being out for an hour or two. However, that can create risks in a wildfire area during wildfire season. And so during wildfire season, we're disabling that capability. Many of those devices are remote controlled. We can send a signal through our system to turn them on or turn them off. And so if we have that ability, we do so based on the weather forecast. If we're in a high fire threat time, then we'll turn that power, we'll turn that capability off. If it's low, then we'll turn it back on. Others of these devices have to be manually turned on and off, and in those cases, they've just been turned off for all of wildfire season. What this means is that you may experience a longer outage than you would have in the past. If there is a fault on your circuit, the recloser will open, as in stop the flow of electricity, and it will stay that way until we have a chance to patrol the line, make sure there's no problems out there, and then manually close it back in.
Are you doing that during the underground areas?
So it's, the underground areas are sort of follow the pattern of any overhead that they're connected to, right? So if that underground is for, several blocks, but then it goes above ground afterwards.
We have a huge area of 2,000 homes, so it's not just a short area.
Yeah.
I think this will be covered, won't it?
I don't know that exact detail will be covered. If it depends on how the circuit is designed and where the shutoff points are, where the reclosers are. If it really is an isolated underground area, then it would not be subject to this.
Well, I'm shocked with you're addressing this area, and all the fire area has been undergrounded.
No.
That's not true.
Now, in our area, the place
Yeah,
that we're down.
in your area it has been, but not every place.
Just a minute. In our area, which is a huge area in North Hills, we undergrounded, and and we did it for your same reason. And now you're saying that you're unprepared. You don't even know where our area is, and you come to our meeting and don't say it. Well, he just told us that he doesn't know what he doesn't
Howard,
know what our
I
area is.
think it
Be polite.
depends on where the fire is coming from. I think there's a lot of different stipulations.
Well, remember, the public safety power shutoff is not if a fire is coming, right? The public safety power shutoff is to prevent a fire from occurring. So it's, if the weather forecast is, high threat enough, we would be taking that action. I don't know where you live, I don't know the details of how your circuit is operated, but the answer related to how our system works is, it depends on where your circuit is fed from and where it goes to. If it is fed from or goes to any overhead circuits that are in the Tier 3 area, then it may be subject to turning off power under these conditions.
When are we gonna get that information?
Well, you can get that information by putting in your address.
No, we haven't heard that.
So-
We've been trying to do it, and we've not gotten that information.
trying to answer your question.
So if you go to pg&e.com/wildfire safety, there's an area to click and see and enter your address. And it would say if your address is subject to power safety, public safety power shutoff, or not. If it says you are, then it's because part of the circuit goes through an overhead area that we would need to shut off. I got 2 more slides and then I'll open it up for questions. So I think we covered the reclosers. The reclosers are something we've deactivated to improve the wildfire resiliency, potentially at the cost of a few more outages. And then electric system hardening. This is our long-term program, changing the design of our system. Over the last 5 years, we've already invested $15 billion in upgrading our systems. And wildfire risk has been at the top of our risk profile focus area for a long time. So we've already been adjusting our designs and upgrading our assets with wildfire risk in mind. And going forward, we're only sharpening that focus. As we replace assets, you may see stronger coated power lines where they looked like bare wire before. You may also see non-wood poles in place of wood poles. So this is not an overnight solution, right? It takes a long time before we can get through all of our assets. We have a big system and a lot of customers out there. But as you see work being done, you may notice things look different, and it's because of this. So that's the summary of our community wildfire safety program. There's a lot more information and more detail on certain parts if you're interested. You can call that phone number. You can email us at wildfiresafety@pgne.com. The benefit of emailing there is, number one, we have a dedicated staff that will respond within 1 business day. And number 2, they'll get it to the right person. So, I'm not necessarily the right person for every question about your neighborhood or this or that. But if you get it there, we'll get it to the right person and get your answer back to you. And then lastly, the website, as I mentioned a couple times, pgne.com/wildfire safety, has a lot of this